Welcome to Please Make This Movie, a podcast where we take a beloved movie and pitch a sequel, prequel, or remake. This week we're doing things a little bit differently, tackling Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. I'm Storm, joined by Luke for the very first time. We're here to talk about Star Wars. Luke, what are your, if you could distill your feelings on Episode 1 into a brief sentence or statement, what would that be?
Oh man, I would just say confusing and boring.
Boring is spot on, I think. So I think for the two of us, it's important to note that we saw this movie as kids. Like we were like 6 or 7 at the time it came out, and even then, I know that I found it boring. If that makes sense. Like I liked that, the action. I think I liked the pod race, and I liked the lightsaber duel at the end. But aside from that, there was a whole lot going on in this movie that it was beyond me. It just definitely, there's a lot of dialogue, a lot of political stuff. I'm putting major air quotes around the word political stuff. The plot is kind of trying and nonsensical. And then when you go back and rewatch it, as you get a little bit older, those parts that I liked as a kid, like the lightsaber fights and the pod racing, that is by far the coolest and most engaging stuff in that movie. It's really quite crazy.
Yeah,
almost like.
Oh, go ahead. No, I was just gonna say I completely agree with you. I went back when you prompted me to do this with you. I went back and then rewatched it, and it was such a chore, and it was such a trip going back through it because, like you said, we were like 6 when it came out, and I was so excited, and and really all I remember from the movie, even though I've seen it, I've seen that one more than the other prequels. I only remember the first half because even as a kid, like after the pod race, it's just a slog,
Yeah, I'll be totally honest. I did not rewatch this movie in preparation for this recording session. I know I've seen it a bunch of times in the past, but I just didn't feel compelled to do that. I kind of knew what I wanted to say in a pitch and what I felt needed to be there. So I don't even remember. Like, I know the broad strokes. After the pod race, Anakin gets taken into the custody of the Jedi, or the custody. Yeah, I mean, that kind of is what happens. And then they go to Coruscant, and like some weird shit happens, and eventually they end up on Naboo, and the ending happens. Why do they go to Naboo?
They go to Naboo because, oh my god, it's so confusing. So they go to Coruscant, or Coruscant, as he says. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Coruscant? Yeah. They go there, and then there's all these political shenanigans with Senator Palpatine. He's like, the current leader of the Senate is not going to do enough to help Naboo, who's being invaded by the Trade Federation. So we need a new chancellor. We need a new leader of the Senate. And so in order to do that, Queen Amidala, who is also an elected official, which doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
She has to essentially start this kind of like political movement in the Senate, this galactic Senate, to get enough votes of a vote of no confidence, where they say we don't have confidence in Chancellor Valorum, the current chancellor. We want somebody new who has the balls to stand up to the Trade Federation, which the only person, the one we want is is Darth Sidious, is Senator Palpatine. So it's Sheev, yeah.
Yes. his as was later revealed as his full name is Sheev Palpatine. So, Stevie Palpatine. Yeah, I do remember the word or the term vote of no confidence. And as a kid, I was like, damn, that sounds like something that is completely outside of my realm. But it was not intriguing enough that I went away from the movie and was like, I'm going to learn what that means.
No,
it wasn't until years later going back Well, I mean, I guess, is that a real thing? Does that does that
I
happen?
would assume so, but I have
Okay.
a similar experience to you. Like this most recent time that my wife and I went back and watched it, it was like we were pausing it and like rewinding and like what is that? Like what is a vote of no con-? Well, yeah, but
Yeah.
then it's really because it sounds so heady to a child, it makes it sound smarter than it is, but it's really confusing and it makes no sense.
It's kind of a weird focus to like take the core
Mm,
story and take the narrative focus off of any centralized main character and their conflicts or goals, and shift to this situation that these characters are coming in later in the movie, if I'm not mistaken, like Palpatine and Valorum.
mm.
They're not there at the beginning, are they?
I don't think so.
Okay. And is Valorum, is he played by the guy who was General Zod in the old Superman movie?
Probably. I could not tell you.
I think he is. Terrence Stamp is that actor. I
Nice.
don't 100% remember, but I'm picturing his face cuz that guy, he kind of doesn't matter,
No.
like I remember the name Chancellor
Mm,
Valorum and then Chancellor Palpatine, but like aside from that last scene with Palpatine in episode 1 where he's looking at Anakin and like, "Oh, I'll be watching your career with great interest."
mm,
Like aside from that, he does not stand out in that movie. Like I had no clue. I didn't even know he was from Naboo
right.
until going back. Like that, it just didn't stick as a kid.
No.
And that's a big failure on part of the movie if you're trying to build this villain. He's got the Padme connection. They come from the
Hmm.
same place. They theoretically served in the government
Yes.
together when she was
Hmm.
queen. Um, but it didn't feel like that. That now, I might go back and rewatch it and find out that I'm wrong. And there's scenes like on Naboo in a palace
Mm,
conference room or something. But I don't know. That sounds weird and like a Star Trek movie from the
mm,
90s,
hmm.
more than Star Wars from the
Yeah.
70s.
Which I think brings us to why we're talking about this in the first place is that the prequels just were abject failures of Star Wars movies.
Oh yeah, yeah, undoubtedly. Yeah, so as a young kid, um, we were exposed to Star Wars, the OG movies, and there wasn't so much like expanded. There weren't movies or TV shows or anything at the time, but there were
Hmm.
toys and comic books and books that helped to spread out this universe in a really specific tonal way. That now they've kind of circled back to with like the Mandalorian and a little bit in the prequel or the sequel films, but it was a much more lived in, dusty, dirty, desolate survivalist sort of universe. And then in the prequels, not that those elements aren't present, but it's just so
Hmm.
polished and weird looking. So that tone is jarring. Even as a child, I could tell. And so I think we always knew that we didn't like these movies. Um, and it's important to note that we've seen the Mr. Plinkett
Absolutely.
reviews of all the prequels, and that kind of probably we saw those at an influential
Hmm.
time in late high school, and I think that probably sparked the interest in like, well, what could it be? What could these
Hmm.
movies? How could you change it? What elements could you keep? What would you need to change in order to tell relatively the same story, but in a much more impactful, meaningful, and cohesive way to the rest of the
Hmm.
series? But so we took a road trip about a decade ago, and the first leg of the road trip was from Illinois to Colorado, and it was overnight, like 12, 13, 14 hours, something
Hmm.
like that. And the two of us, we stayed up the whole night driving, and, and pretty much through the entire drive we pitched this remake of episodes 1, 2, and 3 from the ground up, utilizing the little bit of information that is present in the original movies that would inform these stories. And I don't remember
No.
everything that I talked about at that
Hmm.
time, because I mean, it's if you can imagine the state of mind that two caffeinated people are in over a 12-hour drive across the
Hmm.
countryside in the middle of the night. I'm sure there were a lot of weird things, stuff that I remember that I'm gonna omit for
Hmm.
sure. Like we had this like love affair thing with Anakin and Padme that is interesting, where they're not like in a relationship, but more like a fling
Hmm.
that led to a
Hmm.
pregnancy, which is
That is
interesting,
interesting.
but a little adult, a little maybe too mature for Star
Sure.
Wars, maybe. I did end up changing that a little bit in my pitch. But so this context that we're putting this whole episode in kind of is a good segue, I think, into what we thought at the time needed to be in a Star Wars prequel based on the information you're given in A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. What do you think? What do you think some of those elements are?
So before I answer that, I think I also wanted to. This reminds me that I had written down, or one of the things that, like, when you prompted me to talk about this, I was like really struggling to write something because since we had talked about this, like 10 years ago and pretty much all the time since, more and more for me, it's been like, why, do we need prequels to Star Wars? And then, yes or no, we can't really I would say no. That's my opinion. But
Yeah.
this is kind of just a writing exercise that you and I are doing. So I was coming at this kind of from the point of view of like, if I was hired, if I was in the Disney writing board or whatever, and we needed to write 3 prequels, we need like a prequel saga, then to answer your questions, what do we need in there based on the original movies? The big things for me were the Clone Wars, because also I guess I should say maybe the reason the prequels didn't land so hard for me is that I don't want to know the backstory of Darth Vader. I think he's more effective as a character. Everyone's more effective in those movies. Is just I think a backstory is so hard to get right, and it for me kind of ruins the thing that I loved about Star Wars as a kid was the way that it prompts your imagination to kind of fill in a lot of gaps. So filling in the gaps is kind of counterintuitive to what makes Star Wars special to me. But
totally,
again, coming at this kind of from the point of view that this might be a writing exercise, I think the things, and especially because I can't really get out of my head that the prequels were about the rise and corruption of Anakin Skywalker. So that's, at least in my pitch, I still focused on that. I still kept it kind of vague though, based on how much I love so much of the expanded universe stuff, so that it could actually just kind of be an unrelated Star Wars story. But I do like when I was a kid and I heard Obi-Wan, or Ben at the time, tell Luke like, yeah, your father was like a great pilot in the Clone Wars. That really like got my mind going. I was like, the Clone Wars, that's so scary and like, yeah, it's so creepy. Like, what could that be like? So that's where I focused mostly on. That to answer your question, the Clone Wars is an element that I was coming from. Kind of, unfortunately, Anakin Skywalker becoming Darth Vader, and I also in the originals when we hear about things like where the Millennium Falcon comes from, that it's a Corellian ship and that it's really fast, it made the Kessel Run and whatever, XYZ. And we hear about like kind of spice trading, and we hear about like how Lando made his money and that. So that's that kind of spice trading, this kind of weird economy that we get little hints of when we go to Cloud City, and you see, those are really like the 3 or 4 big elements that I thought the originals gave to me as like, if you want to do something as a prequel, if you want to kind of expand this universe a little bit more with these little gems, like go ahead and take these. So that's what I did.
Nice. That's very interesting all around, because you have this kind of almost like disdain for telling the story of Darth Vader. It's cool because these movies probably would have been a lot more compelling if that story was kind of in the background. And maybe the main focus or main characters were telling a conflict that, resolves upon itself before the 3 movies end. And when we get to Luke, it's not like this Luke Skywalker and A New Hope. It's not, we're not so connected, so directly connected. It's not, R2D2 and C3PO get in the blockade runner and are in the ship for 20 years until A New Hope starts. That's crazy.
It's ridiculous
and stupid. And it's just like, why are they even in the movie, So I like that a lot. I like coming at it from that approach of more of a world building. Let's focus on the underground, the dirty underground world, because that's kind of where Han Solo's coming from. But they don't expand on what the legitimate world is in the original movies. So for all we know, it is an economy based on like criminal backroom dealings and smuggling and drugs. We don't know. And that's an awesome place to come at it from. Because for me, it was sort of like, we're going to tell a tale of Darth Vader. We got to talk about the Clone Wars. We got to have something with like, Obi-Wan says to Yoda, like, was I so different when you trained
yeah.
me? So Obi-Wan trained with Yoda. What's her name? Leia. She says something about remembering her mother in Return of the Jedi, which I think is really interesting. But I never took that. Well, because with the prequels as they are, that makes no sense. She saw her mother at birth, and then Padme died.
Right.
So what? So the memory has to be like a Force connection sort of thing. But so I always assumed that thing with Leia was more of her just saying she had a general connection to the Force, which to me kind of informs that maybe, maybe her mother and father, maybe they all were connected to the Force as opposed to what's spelt out in the prequel.
Right.
So that's where I came at it. Same sort of stuff. The Jedi Knights need to be expanded upon a little bit, but maybe not much. Maybe not much. We just know that Obi-Wan was one. He has Anakin's lightsaber. He fought with him. We know he lied about, so he knew that Anakin turned into Darth Vader. That's really it, right? That's kind of it. We don't get a whole lot. And they took it and went, from 0 to 1,000 in the actual prequels with the Jedi Order and the Temple on Coruscant. And there's like thousands of these dudes all throughout the galaxy, which kind of takes the mystique away. And it's like Hogwarts and Harry Potter kind of, which would be cool.
Yeah.
If it was focused on like that, but we don't know how a Jedi trains, what they go through when they're kids. They don't show us any of this shit. And it is very frustrating because the world they created, in my opinion, isn't bad. The stories are bad. The scripts are bad, but the world is interesting. It's just nothing's fleshed out.
And it also, I would say, if I could add one thing, is that any kind of world building that the prequels did about the Force, that it's like a biological thing, and that it's a training, the process. It has this like formalized process. For me, completely ruins the mystique of it, and then also undermines the information that we're given in the originals, where they say like, oh, you still believe in that like ancient religion? Like nobody's believed that for like, what did he say, like hundreds of generations or something like that? Like to me it was like Yoda is like, when we find out about Yoda, it was like, what, there's another one? And it's just like this one creepy old creature living in the swamp. Like that's awesome.
Yeah, that to me, and I think this is something when we originally talked about this on that road trip so many years ago, this was one of the most important things to us, was the idea that there is a mystique surrounding the idea of becoming a Jedi.
Absolutely.
It is very vague because as an audience member, you're more willing to play along with, things happening that don't make sense if there aren't rules. It's like, what could he do? We don't know because it's never been defined. And like, we don't see Luke's training very much. There's a big gap in between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, where he suddenly shows up and he's so much more efficient with these vague skills. And that's really interesting. It's like, what did happen during that time? What did he do to become this guy, and what's he going to do afterwards? He's a different person. His personality has
he's
changed.
A lot darker. He's more mysterious. He's kind of withdrawn too. It's like, but that also, I feel like, and then I'll be done ranting about this, but like it lets, at least for me, let me as a kid put myself in Luke's shoes and be like, you fill in the gaps yourself, and you're like, but when you watch the prequels, it's like, as a kid, I was like, I want to be Luke Skywalker. I want to be a Jedi, or I want to be Han Solo, whatever. You put yourself in these great characters, because there's room for you to put yourself there. In the prequels, it's, if you're watching it, it's like, well, I want to be a Jedi, but like, also that looks terrible. Like I don't want to go to school for like 30 years and not be able to like have a romantic partner, and you're like not allowed. It's so, they look miserable, and it just ruins everything. It's like, you don't need all this.
It's pretty weird. Definitely all these weird strict, like the Jedi doctrine, or whatever it is. And it's even weirder that they never flesh any of that out in a way that gives us any reason to feel bad for any of them, or feel like, oh, Anakin's in the right, the Jedi Order is wrong, because that's ultimately what they're trying to convince us, is like, he realizes that there's flaws in the rules of the Order, and that maybe there's another way, and that leads him to falling to the dark side, pursuing these other belief structures or whatever. But it's so incompetently communicated that it's for naught almost. So why even bother? And I guess to distill all this down, we have major grievances with the way the prequels were executed. The sequels strayed away from it a bit. But that, that's a whole different set of
Mm-hmm.
problems, and maybe, down the line we could do an episode about those.
Mm-hmm.
But they tried at least to, I think, get closer to the tone, and maybe they explain less,
Yeah.
which didn't work in and of itself in a different
Mm-hmm.
way. So there's obviously some sort of middle
Right.
ground, which I think the original movies are in that middle ground of keeping it vague and mysterious and mythical and
Mm-hmm.
mystical in ways that make you ask questions. And it led to like 20 years of expanded universe material that was very interesting and fun to consume as a
Right.
kid.
And I think this is my only disclaimer about me being honest, because I mean, the fact that you and I are having this discussion, like we're now like 4 billionth person to talk about this, like everyone has takes on this.
Oh yeah.
And I guess the only,
Hmm.
if I can like, I just want to say that as a kid, even when the prequels were coming out, and I think you can speak to this too, I was obsessed with Star Wars. Like I spent all of my money and all of my time buying Star Wars merchandise, books, figurines, pretending I was Luke Skywalker, like really until I don't know, until I grew up. But I legitimately hate the prequels, and I cannot watch them. And actually, Episode One is my favorite because it still has kind of a little bit of a gritty feel and it looks like a movie. But all that is
Yeah.
to say, essentially, I hate the prequels, but I love Star Wars. So
Yeah.
this is coming from a place of love. I'm not just trying to like be extremely negative. It's a passionate thing.
Yeah, well, to contextualize it even further, we did a few weeks ago. We did an episode on the Mandalorian, the season 2 of the Mandalorian, and kind of the whole thing. When I was listening back to it and I was editing this episode, there's just so much of us talking about how competently the story structure
Mm,
is of that movie, and how much that was missed in these Star Wars tales, and that's all you really needed was competent
right.
storytelling. Following a structure, giving little clues that have a payoff
Hmm.
later, things that keep you intrigued and interested as an audience member that were not present in the prequels. And then for 5 years of filmmaking at Disney, they did 5 movies, and they all had the same
Yes.
failures. And so it's so frustrating as someone who loves Star Wars as a
Hmm.
whole, as a
Hmm.
property, as an idea, to see all these movies that make it kind of embarrassing to say
Yeah.
that.
Totally. Oh, I do not see that's I yeah, it's hard for me to talk about because like I've been it's really as soon as the prequels came out, like Star Wars became just kind of like a personal thing. Like I didn't even see the what's the third? I don't remember what the third one's called. The Revenge of the Sith.
Revenge of the
You
Sith.
and
Yeah.
our friend Alex showed that to me when we were like seniors in high school because I avoided it because I hated it. Like I was like, I'm done with this. I've never seen the Han Solo movie.
Oh
I
wow.
barely saw like I like for the sequels, these new ones that just came out. Like I went by
Uh huh.
myself to the movie theaters and like had my like collar up like around my like I was like embarrassed to be there because I
Yeah.
hate like and I'm also like a huge Star Trek fan, and these are two foils
Okay.
of one another because like you mentioned earlier, Star Wars is all about the grittiness and the dustiness, and there's some magic going on, and it's kind of nasty puppets. It's really tactile in that way. And then Star Trek has some of that, but it's very cerebral, and there are rules, there's strict rules that typically go along with it. So it's a difficult Star Wars for me is a difficult thing to talk about because it's so what the things that I love about it are in the essentially
Yeah.
like 10% of what has come out. You know what I mean? Like I'm still holding on to these
Yeah.
movies from the late 70s, early 80s.
I don't want to
Yeah.
derail our conversation of episode
Hmm.
1, but I do have to ask because I'm not sure. Have you seen the second season of The Mandalorian?
No, and I loved I know I will watch it. I didn't want to like get too many because I had written my prompt for this discussion, and I didn't want to
I
watch
see.
it and then get inspired like or anything like that.
Totally, that makes sense. I do think that show is doing a lot to return to this tone, and this method of storytelling, this much more structured, audience connection based method of
Hmm.
storytelling that the original movies had. And I'm excited for you to see it. It didn't necessarily influence my pitch either, and I won't say anything to spoil that at all. I was just
Mm.
curious because it's interesting. You have a very fun perspective to come at a rewrite from now, as opposed to someone who's like totally, in the universe and has seen all these movies. Like saying that you haven't seen
Mm-hmm.
Solo is interesting to me because that's another one of those five. That's the one that feels the closest. They're all not good in my opinion. They're not that
Right.
great, but that's the one that of the sequel trilogy, Rogue One, Solo stands out as having a little bit more of that gritty,
Mm,
dirty tone and actual arcs,
right.
set up and payoff of conflicts, that sort
Yeah.
of thing. But that being said, we both have some hot takes on Star
Yeah, totally.
Wars that maybe aren't too unique, um, but we don't hate it as a
No.
whole, and I think that's a good time for us to transition into our pitches for a rewrite of Episode 1. And Luke, if you wanna go first, I would love to hear what you've
Sure.
got.
Okay, so let me bring it up here. Okay, so I guess okay, I'll just read. I wrote like a little treatment and I'll try not to interject too much on it. So, our movie begins with a midnight raid on a dusty camp. Families are being separated and our main character is placed into custody. His family is screaming out his name and we as the audience can't understand what they're yelling, and what they're yelling as the frenzy of this midnight raid. He's being kidnapped as it increases and it gets crazier. The name that they're yelling, that they're screaming for our main character, it becomes louder and louder, and it becomes this kind of shrill ringing noise. The noise gets louder and louder until the main character wakes up, and it's his alarm. It was a dream, a nightmare. He awakens, and we find him in his small, cramped quarters. He sighs, and he shuffles off to work. We see that he is a skilled and modest mechanic on an asteroid mining ship, surrounded by boisterous, grimy aliens. Very blue collar, essentially. In my head, I was thinking a lot about what's the ship in the Nostromo in Alien?
Yeah, the
There's a lot
Nostromo.
of cables hanging around. It's all wet. People are in like tank tops and they're like beer drinking, disgusting aliens. But he's a mechanic on the ship. He's very modest and he's very quiet. And he's also, like I said, he kind of shuffles around and he's like, oh, okay, like another nightmare. He also, we see in his quarters, in his very cramped quarters, he has a small pet, a very cute puppet pet for child reasons, something like a porg, from the sequels. And he wishes it goodbye and he heads off to work. His coworkers, his blue collar alien coworkers, chastise his frequent daydreaming and his desire to fly real ships, with the nickname Skywalker. He rolls his eyes at the nickname, but eventually it sticks, and so that's his moniker. That's the only thing we really hear them say to him. We also see that tensions between this. We get the impression that he is a slave on this ship, and so are all of his coworkers. And so we see in this opening segment that the tensions between the slaves and the overseers is very high, and there are extreme consequences for stepping out of line. So, at the end of one particularly harrowing day of work, Skywalker takes his handmade skiff out to a ridge, and this can mirror Luke's gazing at the twin sunset in New Hope. And he witnesses a small craft careening overhead, and it crashes into a far-off cave system on a remote side of the asteroid. He speeds off in his homemade skiff, and he comes to find laying unconscious within the wreckage is a mysterious creature which Skywalker has never seen. A humanoid woman. He provides first aid and helps her hide better in the caves. She's unconscious. And each night he secretly brings supplies from his quarters until she regains health. She is very standoffish and warns him that she is a dangerous bounty hunter, but she cautiously accepts his help with the repairs of her vessel because he's such a skilled mechanic. Over this time, we learn that this particular bounty hunter, our female main character now, is engaged in a race to recover an ancient artifact. So I'll pause for 1 second. This is I took some elements of a comic book that I read as a kid that's part of the expanded universe canon called the Yavin Basilica.
Cool.
So she is engaged in this race to recover this ancient artifact that, for the purposes of this discussion, will called the Basilica, the Yavin Basilica. It's a statue made of rare gems. It's very ornate, gorgeous, mysterious, and she's engaged in this race because the Hutt crime family has essentially declared a contest for big prize money. There are three Hutt siblings: Jabba, Malta, and Embra, and they're all kind of, it's just this silly contest they're all arguing about. Oh, my bounty hunters are the fastest, yours are terrible. Like, whoever can find this will receive like a humongous prize, and it'll make me look better. So our main character asks to go with her once the repairs are finished, but she outright refuses. She says it's too dangerous. You're going to get in my way. And so he's a little defeated. However, the powder keg of tensions on the mining colony erupt, and the ensuing revolt forces them to flee together. So that's kind of maybe our first act. And each night, and we can kind of parse these in with each night, the slave, or Skywalker rather, dreams of his kidnapping, or what we assume is his kidnapping, but he can't recall anything about his family or his history. It's a lot of shadows, and again, it's very frustrating. So, moving on to the second act, they stop at a galactic watering hole, very seedy, very disgusting, because they want to meet our female main characters. And I haven't given her a name, so I think we'll just say our female main character. They want to meet the woman's friend, Ben. Skywalker is visibly disappointed and somewhat jealous to see that Ben and this woman have a close relationship. Maybe not romantic, but they are closer than Skywalker and her. That night, we see that Ben is friendly and gregarious, and he kind of acts as a foil to Skywalker, who is on the quiet and more guarded side. And they go out drinking. They have a night out, and they're playing cards. They maybe go to like a big monster fight, something like that. And Skywalker begins to loosen up until the woman is recognized by a large alien, claiming that she stole his ship. He sees his ship, and that she has stolen it from him. We learn that she is in fact not a bounty hunter, and she actually did steal this ship from a real bounty hunter, who is this large alien. Skywalker and Ben, who are now cocky and full of themselves because they've been drinking all night and they have this newfound kind of friendship, they step in to defend her. But in this ensuing fight, Skywalker gets terribly injured, and maybe he even loses an arm or something if we want to do callbacks to Luke losing his arm. The real bounty hunter takes his ship with all of their belongings, which so he takes back his ship, but as well as all of their belongings that are inside, which includes not only a map to the Basilica, the object they're all chasing, but also Skywalker's beloved cute pet. It's still on board. So Ben takes the unconscious and horrifically injured Skywalker to a surgeon, and after surgery, they learn that Skywalker is in fact a clone. And one who has been he's been replicated many times before. So they also learn that this particular type of clone is they have only several years in their lifespan before they waste away. They're essentially used for cheap and quick labor, and then they deteriorate. And Skywalker realizes he doesn't know how old he is. He doesn't know how long he's been alive for. However, the surgeon lets them know that there are practitioners of a mysterious ancient religion on some outer rim planet that may be able to prolong Skywalker's deterioration. They also realized that Skywalker had placed a tracking device on the ship that they took originally when he was repairing it, so he could keep track. And they realized that this outer rim planet is in the same system as the Basilica. So using this tracked information and a newfound determination to reverse the ticking clock element, Skywalker's remaining life, and also to get back his very cute pet that they're all very fond of, and also to, of course, the ultimate goal, find the Basilica and split the prize money. Our three friends pursue the real bounty hunter to the outer rim. And so this is the end of the first movie. And as they blast off in Ben also has a ship, maybe like a small, just rickety ship. As they blast off in Ben's vessel, Skywalker also silently yearns to find missing pieces of his history and to secure a future of his own. And we see also that a strong friendship and a love triangle is becoming apparent between our female protagonist, Skywalker, and Ben. And so that's the end of my movie. And then I have a few just future directions.
I see. Okay.
So moving forward, maybe into the second movie, we would find that the Basilica is indeed a real thing, and it's made from crystals. But these are the crystals that are required in the production of lightsabers. And Ben and Skywalker take these crystals for their own. And throughout the second movie, neither of them have the Force in my universe. The Force is not biological inherited thing. It's just something that you can practice, and it's an art form. It's a martial art. In some way, they both start to practice the Force with one another, kind of a friendly competition thing, and then they both build their own lightsabers. And these two lightsabers are the only ones in the galaxy. There aren't other Jedis. Like, they're the only two, as far as we know, in the movie's logic, they're the only two Jedis, and they've made their own lightsabers. It's kind of like a personal thing for them. They made their own swords, and they're training to become space samurai. Then the second movie would also focus on the Clone War aspect, and that the Clone Wars themselves is that because, like I mentioned, that clones are essentially just cheap slave labor for these spice mining, asteroid mining operations. Essentially, the Hutts run it. It's really just disgusting. They kidnap young people from different planets, and then they just clone them for into infinity. So the Clone Wars is essentially that our team helps lead a clone revolt against the slave traders and end this practice. So the Clone Wars is essentially like a revolutionary war or something like that. Clones getting their freedom, I guess, kind of like a civil war too. And then my final thing is that if we need to establish where the Galactic Empire comes from, I was thinking, because A New Hope is just Kurosawa's Hidden Fortress, we could base the formation of the Galactic Empire on, and because Kurosawa, all his classic films, a lot of them are just Shakespearean plays set in a different setting. So we could use another Kurosawa or a Shakespearean work to set up how the Galactic Empire forms. And so in that, Skywalker has good intentions, but he becomes corrupted. And the ones I was thinking was Macbeth, which is Kurosawa's Throne of Blood, or King Lear, which is Kurosawa's Ran. And if we do Ran, that would be that in the third, and maybe set up in the second movie, that if we go with King Lear or Ran, Skywalker becomes the adopted son, essentially, or he is healed of his deterioration because he's a clone. They heal that, and that's part of why he has maybe his armor. As stupid as a lot of that like Wikipedia like stuff is, like he needs the armor to because he can't breathe or whatever, but that could be part of what it is. So that's why he's become kind of like half man, half machine. In doing so, he becomes adopted, essentially the de facto adopted son of some leader, and he takes over from that leader to prevent the two other more evil siblings from committing even worse atrocities, whatever their goals are for like galactic. Yeah. So that's what I have.
Okay. So that's okay. I see the King Lear angle there for sure. That's amazing. And I'm just going to go ahead and say, before I comment on this at all, that it would be futile for us to try to combine our pitches. They're like light years away from one another. So I really like you spelling out your plan for kind of the three movies if we do come back and talk about how, because I only did episode 1. And if we want to talk about, episode 2 or 3, you've laid out some very interesting groundwork. I love the clone kind of it's like a nod to Blade Runner, to the replicants, and his name isn't even Anakin. You never said Anakin, and I'm assuming, where I would go as a viewer, and you don't have to answer this now, but it makes me think that what we find out is that the original person that this clone is based on is named Anakin.
That's what I was thinking.
And Skywalker, I don't know if you. I don't know where you're coming from, but one of these creators along the way said something. It might have been J.J. Abrams, in which case it doesn't necessarily affect the greater lore, although he did direct 2 of the big movies. But he said something like, Skywalker is not this great legacy like everyone thinks. Skywalker is the name of it's a commoner name, like Smith or something like that. Or I think about like Game of Thrones. I don't know. I don't think you've seen that, but the name Snow is like a name that's given to bastard children. Okay. It's just a common name of like, if you are in this status or this caste, you get this name. So Skywalker being a nickname, you had said that it's something that the other slaves.
Yeah, they make fun of him because he's always daydreaming. He's very much like Luke. In that he wants something better. He's So he's always daydreaming, and
maybe
he
it's
he also talks a lot about like, oh, if I had my own real ship, like I would blast off into the sky, whatever.
that's very intriguing. I like the mystery of it, of like, who is this
Mm-hmm.
person? What do they know? What is to be unlocked within their clone
Right.
mind? Um, and the idea of the suit being an element of the suit being that his body was set to decay
Mm-hmm.
decades
Mm-hmm.
ago. He should be, by all rights, he should be
Mm-hmm.
dead, but the suit is keeping him alive, even though he's been, he has no limbs
Mm-hmm.
even, but his chest and all of his vital organs, his
Yeah.
brain, they should be dead, but they're
Yeah.
not. That is awesome. Uh,
Oh well, thanks.
that's way cooler. It's a much more out there approach than what I did, and I like it a lot. I I think it's unfortunately like too intelligent for like the Disney direction that they're going in. It's more cerebral,
Mm-hmm.
asks some greater questions, and takes influence from classic work like Kurosawa and Shakespeare, which thus far, unfortunately, even the good Disney outings into Star Wars don't have such obvious classic parallels. I guess The Mandalorian has Lone Wolf and Cub,
Right.
um, but only a little bit.
Right.
You know what I mean? Just in
Mm-hmm.
concept. And I love the idea of thinking of direct Shakespearean parallels like King Lear or
Mm-hmm.
Ron and Macbeth, especially because like that descent into
Mm-hmm.
madness, that's what we needed to see for Anakin or Skywalker, as you
Right.
call him.
Because ultimately, and I think this is the last thing I'll say before I when I hand it over to you, is that like the disconnect between how we see Anakin, he's like the prequels like want us to he was in love and then his like love died, but the disconnect between that and then in the first like 20 minutes of the original movie he fucking
Yeah.
obliterates a planet. Like he kills like billions of people. Like this man, he's not like it has to ramp up like a million times to get to,
Yeah.
because he's also not a good person. So that's kind of part of my pitch too, is that he's kind of jealous. I guess he is in the prequels, but he's really unlikable, and it's a very tough. That's why it's like it's an unenviable task to like, where did Darth Vader come from? Like, because
Oh
he's
yeah.
like one of the most evil characters he should be if you weren't gonna mess with it.
Yeah. No, I love it. I think that's very apt, and I even like Obi-Wan being Ben the
Yeah.
whole time. Like literally the name Obi-Wan is like his birth name. No one ever called him that. So when he hears it in A New Hope, it's like, "Oh, they must really be trying to find
Hmm.
me. Like I've gone by Ben for 50
Right.
years." Not like Ben is a hiding name, but Ben is just the name people know him
Right.
by.
Or that Obi-Wan is a name that he's given. Maybe they give each other names like, you're
Oh,
Anakin, like, and
cool.
and you're Obi-Wan, like, because they train
Cool.
together. They kind of come up with the Force
That's
together.
awesome. That is so fucking cool. That's like that's way beyond anything in the idea that they would have given names.
Hmm.
Oh my god, that's so cool. And there's like some universal appeal in that
Right.
of like if you could choose who you wanted to be, you could craft your own
Right.
destiny. You could literally rename yourself and start
Hmm.
again. And they're kind of like yin and yang.
Yes,
I don't know,
exactly.
man. I love that. That's why I want to say right away. I don't want to try to combine our pitches or come up with anything that's like distilling them
Hmm.
together. I just really like the angle you're coming at it from, and if we do another episode, I would love to hear a more developed version of these Shakespearean kind of adaptations into his fall. I
Sure.
love it. I don't know. I thought that was
Awesome. Well,
fantastic.
thanks. And I should also say,
Um,
besides Blade Runner, the other thing that I just realized I was ripping off his moon is the like how many times this person's
oh,
been
okay.
cloned.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a really interesting concept in and of itself of how you create like a sense of
Hmm.
self or individuality once you realize that you're not the only version of
Hmm.
yourself that existed. In fact, you're probably one of the least important versions of this guy that ever
Hmm.
existed. That's cool. That's cool. It reminds me of like Officer K and Blade Runner 2049 and the theme of like what impact the impact that people who are unimportant or the idea that the
Hmm.
mundane can still be important in the long
Mm-hmm.
run.
Or drive someone to overcompensate and become like a total homicidal, insane person.
Yeah,
You know, like I'll
yeah,
show you, I'm not just a
the inverse
clone.
of it. Oh yeah, that's crazy. Oh man, that's very intriguing. The idea that he would be a clone, and then that means his clones can reproduce. So
Right.
his son is like partial clone. That's very
Mm-hmm.
cool. I like it. So transitioning from that, I'll go ahead and go into my pitch, which is very different, which is good. That's good because we're not going to combine them. We just want to talk about our ideas, get them out there, and put some new, fresh ideas of what the prequels could be. Maybe Disney's going to remake these. We don't know what's going to happen. By the time we're 50 years old, there's going to be 20 more Star Wars movies out there, and who has any idea what that content
Yeah.
could be? So my pitch is it involves a lot of context, and that was difficult for me. It was like, how the fuck do I explain this history that I want to exist in order for my story to take place? So somehow, what I have in my pitch is this section that's opening crawl will establish, and then like a page of
Mm.
information. So I'm going to go into that first, and maybe some of this information gets revealed in dialogue in the first act of the movie, and maybe some of it you find out through they do weird shit where they tell you stuff in like visual guides or toys or on the internet, so it doesn't all have to be spelled out directly, but this is the context in which my Star Wars episode 1 takes place. So 30 years ago, a clone army was created to serve as a grand army of the Galactic Republic. Word had reached the galactic government that a massive war in a distant galaxy destroyed hundreds of planets that were homeworlds to these various nations and species, which turned all of these countless species into refugees. These refugee factions, they fled to the galaxy that we know, searching for worlds to colonize or just call their home. Some of them were peaceful, some of them were very powerful and influential and did not come in peace at all. So the clone army was created as a defense measure. The Galactic Senate panicked, said there's all these refugees coming in. This is going to be a problem. We're not going to be able to govern. We're going to have to make some big changes. We don't want them. So they create this clone army who decimates the incoming refugee factions, leaving the remnants of these species bitter, very resentful towards the Galactic Republic. And some of these factions go on to become major weapons manufacturers for the Republic, primarily dealing in droids, but that takes decades. So that instance of the destruction of these refugee factions from the far galaxy was considered the first Clone War, because they call it the Clone Wars, plural. So in my mind, it can't just be like one isolated incident. It's got to be like 30 years of a thing. So after the first Clone War, the act of cloning soldiers was deemed illegal. It's frowned upon by the Galactic Republic, and an era of relative peace begun. 30 years later, the remnant refugee factions from the Lost Galaxy, which that's how I want to refer to it as, is the Lost Galaxy. They're kind of led by the Neimoidians and the Intergalactic Trade Federation, and they're now waging war on the Republic for the desolation that was caused during their attempted plight to integrate into the Galactic Republic during the first Clone War. So the clones, we keep the fact that they age twice as fast as regular humans. So they're in their 60s now. It's been 30 years, and the galaxy has no united army because it's been relatively peaceful for the past 30 years. So when our story sets off, there's been a large-scale recruitment or drafting effort by all of the United Planets of the Galactic Republic, and they're trying to draw in young soldiers to face off against the impending separatist droid army threat. So I'm keeping elements of the Phantom Menace in there as much as possible while starting anew. And the newly formed Grand Army of the Republic is led by Jedi Knights, though there are very few. Their numbers are few and far between, and they're kind of a mysterious group where their training methods and what they can do, what they're capable of, people have no idea. It's a complete mystery. It's just the leader of that squad is Mace Windu, and he is a Jedi Knight. So there is still this mystique, but there's more of them. There's more than two. So the first act of the film itself would essentially be a remake of a Phantom Menace within this new context with the 30 years of the Clone Wars, and they destroyed all these alien factions. So they have a reason to be bitter, as opposed to like they're separatists trying to overthrow the government for question marks. The Grand Army of the Republic has a camp out, kind of a campsite on Naboo. The evening before a raid is planned on the capital city, which has been overrun by Trade Federation battle droids, similar to the third act of A Phantom Menace, but now that's our intro. We're introduced to our squad, our main characters. Like they literally all serve on the same squad within the Galactic Republic. They're a team, and it's Anakin Skywalker, Padme Amidala, and Owen Lars. Some expository dialogue is shared that establishes that these characters, who they are, what where they come from, and the unit as a whole, not just their squad, but the combination of all of these squads that are stationed outside of the city, ready to go into battle, are commanded by two Jedi Knights, Qui-Gon Jinn and Mace Windu. Anakin, Padme, and Owen, they share a fireside meal. They talk about themselves, and so it's kind of honestly, it's kind of boring. I don't have like a big action moment for the intro, more of just quiet character moments for a good 20 minutes. Padme reveals that she's from Naboo, and as a child, she was elected queen. She in her mind, she considered this kind of a backwards system, never really made any sense, and so she voluntarily chose to serve in the Grand Army of the Republic, kind of like a stance that the highborn elected officials of her planet will serve alongside the impoverished people who maybe are drafted or forced to go into the army. So she's got, very like altruistic moral reasons for wanting to be a soldier. Owen, he reveals that he's from Tatooine and he knows Anakin. He saw Anakin win a pod race on Boonta Eve when he was a kid that led to him winning his freedom. They were both slaves. And Anakin is very he's introverted. He just like, I'm glad you were there and I'm glad you got out too. He doesn't really comment on what, Owen is like. He's blown away. It's like this dude's a hero, but Anakin, he downplays it. Owen also mentions that if it weren't for his fiance and his plans to start a family, he would never, ever think about returning to Tatooine. And Anakin ominously mentions that he's going to go back, but just once. And we see a close-up of him gripping this pendant that's attached to his bracelet on his wrist. The trio, they all comment on a platoon of clones who are eating helmetless around an adjacent fire. And the clones all, we see them, they're in their 60s. Stark white hair, battle scars, they're old men. They look hard. They look like killers. And it's a sharp contrast to the three maybe 20, 22-year-old soldiers that are our main characters. So Owen mentioned something along the lines of, I sure wish we had a couple hundred more of those guys to back us up, kind of establishing that the soldiers are afraid and they really wish that the clones had not been outlawed and that they could handle that as opposed to the regular people of the galaxy being forced to serve to protect their homeworlds. Qui-Gon and Mace Windu approach the squad. There's probably more people in the squad, but I'm not going to flesh any of them out. I'm just going to say it's Owen, Anakin, and Padme, but we can say they're a group of 10 or so. The Jedi tell them that Obi-Wan Kenobi, a Jedi Knight who is in training, he's Qui-Gon's apprentice, he is returning from his pilgrimage to Dagobah to complete his training, and he will become the commander of their company. The morning comes around, and Obi-Wan is yet to arrive. The unit as a whole, they move out to invade the overrun city. Some minor conflicts ensue in which we see that the clones are clearly the elite soldiers. They clear their path as the unit makes their way towards a power plant that is at the center of the city. And the rest kind of plays out like the Phantom Menace, except instead of Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, it's Mace Windu and Qui-Gon who are there when this door opens and Darth Maul comes out. So they go off to fight him. And the rest of the squad eventually makes their way into the ships and into space, where we see Anakin, who up to this point has been very reserved, soft-spoken. You don't really know what he's capable of. We see him display nearly supernatural piloting skills, and he takes down the droid command ship, liberating the planet. We cut back to the power plant, where we see Darth Maul kill Qui-Gon, who kind of, he wasn't really a character. He was just there. He's killed. Obi-Wan arrived in an X-Wing. He was a little bit late. He arrived just in time to see Qui-Gon be killed. Him and Mace Windu attempt to apprehend Maul in the moment, but Darth Maul, he just books it. He runs out of there and he flees. And before he runs, maybe it's like the same scene where there's all the weird platforms and energy beams shooting into the air. Before he runs away, he hisses an ominous warning that be careful of who you train. Your Jedi Order is broken. Kind of hisses that at them. So it's this ominous, like, what? Who is he? What's he talking about? What does he mean? But he's got an agenda. We just don't know what it is. That evening, they have a burial fire for Qui-Gon in the, their forest encampment outside of the city in Naboo. Obi-Wan is introduced to the squad as their new leader. Mace Windu, during this meeting, he pulls Obi-Wan aside and he tells him that he and Qui-Gon recognize that within this unit, the Force is incredibly powerful. And he requests that Obi-Wan begin feeling out the members of the squad in order to find who should be trained, because they're very selective about who they bring in. Their numbers are few and far between, and they're kind of secretive about their training methods. Kind of throughout the next act, Obi-Wan, we see sequences where he reveals information about the Jedi and the Force to Anakin, Padme, and Owen. The Order was once 1,000 strong, but that was hundreds of years ago. In this modern era, their numbers are limited, and they want to protect these secrets of the Force that they know about and pass them on only to people who they deem worthy, and that's part of the problem. So he tells the trio that he's got to test them to decide who amongst them will be his newest apprentice. That apprentice would train with him for a while before setting off on their own pilgrimage to Dagobah to train with the famed Jedi Master Yoda. So we see a bit of a montage with various tests. I assume Obi-Wan is kind of one-on-one with these people in a tent, reading their mind, vibing with their thoughts, very meditative sequences. During an evening, we're still in encampment on Naboo. They have not been called back to Coruscant to go out on their next expedition. So for a while, maybe half the movie is just this unit in this camp in the woods. During the evening, Anakin awakes from a nightmare, similar to like the sequences in Lord of the Rings when someone touches the ring or is like, flashed by Sauron, like kind of everything comes at you at once. Padme's there. She consoles him. Anakin reveals that he has always known since he was a child that something was off. He was connected to something. He didn't know what it was, but from the time he was a child, he's been guided by this feeling, this voice. And when he was a kid, it allowed him to have kind of an unnatural influence over people. So when he was a slave, he was able to convince people to treat him less harshly, or to favor him. And aside from manipulation of human beings, what he also always had is he could understand technology fluently from birth. Anything. If he saw, like a remote control, he immediately knew what every piece of it would do, and he could feel it. He could take it apart and put it back together in an instant without having to think about it, which to me, foreshadowing to the fact that he will one day become half mechanical man. It was always a part of him. So he reveals to Padme that he was a slave when he was on Tatooine. He won his freedom through pod racing, and the gangsters that had put up money for him helped him to get off the planet. And eventually someone from the Galactic Republic Army noticed his skills and recruited him to join the army. And it was this great escape tale. Oh, he also tells her that his mom is still on Tatooine. His greatest regret is that he was unable to free her. He's going to go back. He's going to save her one day. Padme says that she also has been in tune with something greater than herself her entire life, and that's how she was able to gain political influence and become elected as a child on Naboo. She essentially rigged it for herself. She didn't know what she was doing, but that's what happened. So her and Anakin are drawn closer because of this mutual force connection that they both had their entire lives. They didn't know what it was, but Obi-Wan has kind of just opened the doors for them to find who they're going to be and what impact they're going to have. She also tells Anakin that she's going to help him find his mom. So during this same night, while Anakin and Padme are having this moment, Owen comes to Obi-Wan and he tells him that he knows that he doesn't want this. He doesn't want to be a Jedi. When the war is over, he wants to go back home to Tatooine, and he wants to have a family. He wants to have a normal life. Obi-Wan kind of laughs, and he tells him that he knows, and he doesn't have to worry, but he has a greater role to play. He can kind of sense that Owen is a good person, and he'll help them out eventually, even if it isn't in this moment becoming the next Jedi warrior or whatever. So the next day, Anakin is chosen as Obi-Wan's apprentice, and Mace Windu reveals that he is decided to take on Padme as an apprentice. So they're both going to be trained simultaneously. We kind of see some training sequences as the action is transferred to various planets as they make their way kind of back to Coruscant. We see sequences with the whole squad fighting droids. The clones are emphasized as being the most competent soldiers. Once again, big emphasis on how bad it would be if the clones were not there anymore to help out the younger recruits. We get this feeling that they're not being trained as well as they should. They're relying on these 65-year-old guys to save their ass, and those guys are dying out slowly and slowly and slowly. So the stakes are going to get really bad when all the clones die. Eventually, Anakin is ready to set out towards Dagobah to train with Master Yoda, and the evening before his departure, he has this unrelenting nightmare. Anytime he tries to go to sleep, he's immediately woken, and he sees his mother. So Anakin sneaks out, he steals a transport vessel, and he heads off towards Tatooine somewhere to attack the clones. But this time, Padme and Owen, they awake, and he's not in his bunk. He's missing. So they go wake up Obi-Wan, and they all, along with Mace Windu, get in a ship and head to stop him. So we cut to our final act, which is set on Tatooine. It's Anakin. He approaches Watto and, is I think it could even still be Watto, just straight up Watto. But he's way slimier. And right away, Anakin's like, hey, like, Watto, where's Shmi Skywalker? And Watto's like, oh, shit. Like, this guy's clearly come a long way from when he was that little kid that I literally enslaved. And Anakin is freaking out. He's furious. And he's like, where's my mother? Where's my mother? I know something's wrong. Where's she at? And Watto says, we had a break-in at the encampment, at the barracks where we keep the slaves. Tusken Raiders broke in and they killed some people. They took some people. We don't know. She might have been taken. So Anakin flies into a fury. He steals a speeder and he heads off into the desert. He arrives at dusk at the camp, and the first thing he sees is a stake, maybe 50 yards in front of the encampment, and his mother is literally crucified. So he sees her. She's dead. He never had a chance. And he's crying. He's holding the pendant, and we kind of get the idea that the pendant was all he had from her. Maybe that was given to her before he left the planet. And he flips out. He starts driving through the camp, shooting out of the speeder. So he's just absolutely decimating this place. Eventually, he kind of jumps off, seeing people run out, and Anakin has his first lightsaber because he's been training a little bit with Obi-Wan. He's just cutting through him, killing him. He's enraged. So we're seeing this guy who's been very reserved the whole movie. He's broken. He's freaking the fuck out. And suddenly, drums, very deep drums. I imagine the scene in Moria where Pippin, in Lord of the Rings, where Pippin knocks the skeleton down the well, just drums. But it's real. There's real drums. And Anakin, he can't tell what's going on. And we see at the very back of the encampment a larger tent. And the drums, it's coming from in there. The tent flaps open and fucking Darth Maul walks out. It was a trick. It was a trap. He was trying to get Anakin to come back. He doesn't reveal any of this, but we kind of, we interpret this as the audience. He comes out, he smiles at Anakin, and he ignites the lightsaber. The two immediately start fighting. It's crazy. We don't know Darth Maul, but there's something familiar about the aggression that both of them are executing at one another, like they're, two sides of the same coin. And through the fight, there's got to be some dialogue, because that was always the problem in the prequels is even in the Anakin and Obi-Wan fight, the dialogue is what drives a fight forward. So I think there's, some dialogue where Darth Maul is, while they're locked, their lightsabers are locked, he's telling him, you have no idea. You have no idea who you are. You have no idea what you're capable of. You have no idea where any of this power comes from. But I could help you. I can help you. We were both tricked. We're both cogs in a machine, but I can liberate you. And Anakin, he doesn't want to trust this guy. So he's, a big thing is Darth Maul tells him, I know whose voice has plagued your sleep every night since you were a child. Because until this point, we just have heard, kind of like Sauron. It's just a voice. So it's like, oh shit, who is that? Will be revealed in later movies. But Anakin refuses. He tries to fight him again, and Darth Maul just cuts his arm off at the forearm. At that moment, the ship that was tracking him, Padme, Owen, Obi-Wan, and Mace Windu, they arrive to rescue him. Darth Maul is overpowered, and he is knocked unconscious. Hard contrast to him being chopped in half in the original episode 1. We move into our ending. It's kind of a montage. Anakin is in a Bacta tank. Darth Maul is being arrested and taken into custody, kind of giving us the implication that he's gonna come back. They're gonna question him in the next movie, but the last we see of him is he's being arrested. Anakin emerges with a new robotic arm. We see kind of a Jedi ritual in which Anakin and Padme are, I don't know if it's officially their bonding ritual to Obi-Wan and Mace Windu, or it's some sort of, we see something, some Jedi shit. Finally, Anakin and Obi-Wan board a cruiser to Dagobah, and the end of the movie is dueling sunsets, twin sunsets. That starts to play as we see the ship enter into the atmosphere of Dagobah. It's clear. It's not as foggy as it was in Return of the Jedi and Empire Strikes Back. It's still gray sky, but it's clear. We cut to the ground. Yoda is looking up. We don't see any dialogue, but you just see him looking up, and he sees the cruiser, and his hand reaches out as if he's calling out in the Force, and we see a reaction shot of Anakin and Obi-Wan who are moved. They're like something just went through the ship. They have been contacted by this grand force. They clearly have felt this call of the wise old master. And Obi-Wan kind of looks at Anakin as if to ask for his approval or ask him if he's ready. And Anakin, he says, "I'm ready. Lower the ship." The cruiser descends, and we cut to credits as the bum 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 bum. The Star Wars music starts to play, and that's it. I have some crazy ideas about where it will go, but I didn't want to flesh it out too much because that already was a lot.
Wow.
But in terms of like where we're going with the story, in the second movie, Anakin would kind of be a hero a little bit. He's a Jedi now, and even though he did these rebellious actions in the first movie, he's completed his training. We don't ever see Anakin's training with Yoda. I think that's very important. When we start the movie, it's over. He's returned, and I think he makes a ton of lightsabers throughout this prequel. Like, he is technologically gifted. Like, he can fix ships, he can pull things apart with the Force and rebuild them into other objects. So in my idea, in the second movie, he saw Darth Maul's double-bladed lightsaber in the first one. He's got a blue double-bladed lightsaber in the second one.
Oh, wow.
But Anakin is called to protect these. There's a mission on like these outer rim spice mines, or just mines of some sort. I called the planet Camino. And when Anakin goes there, Darth Maul is there, and it was a trap. Again, he keeps falling into these traps, and the mine is collapsed. And Anakin is thought dead, but the native people of this planet, they have a very ancient and strong Force connection, and they dig him out, and his chest was crushed, so he's fitted with a respirator, and they give him the name Darth Vader, which maybe means survivor, or it means something to them. It's important to their culture. And because of his abilities, when he's revived, they know, like, he's so strong, he becomes their leader. So the series my idea of it playing out is Anakin comes back as like a people's hero. He's seen that the Republic was kind of taking advantage of these refugee factions from the first Clone War, and now they're just trying to like eliminate these people entirely to cover up their tracks because they've got too many people in the galaxy and not enough resources. And Anakin, he was a slave, so he's on their side. So he's coming back to have his own kind of revolution, but somewhere along the lines, and I didn't write a story structure for 2 or 3, but Palpatine convinces him that the only way to help the common man is to rule with an iron fist. You can't have these, 1,000 independent governments. You have to have one overarching empire that keeps the people safe and keeps them fed. And Anakin falls to this ideal, and probably, maybe his love dies or whatever. But I think it's more impactful if he had a good reason for turning bad.
Right, especially because if the original tension is like essentially like migration issues, like refugees coming in, it's like, well, none of this would have happened if, we had this unified galactic empire.
Yes, and I like the idea
in the first place.
Yeah, that there's like an overwhelming and overarching and unspoken sense of shame about the Grand Army of the Republic, because 30 years prior, the first Clone War, maybe Clone War 1, or I think it should just be the first and second Clone War, they literally intentionally tried to commit genocide on these incoming refugees, and that is, that's bad. But I don't know if that could be like too serious or too dark, but that's where I'm coming at it from.
Oh my god! Well done. That was fabulous. I love that.
Now it's a lot more in line with what was like. I literally just took moments from some of the prequels that I thought worked, like the Naboo stuff. No Gungans, but and the Trade Federation stuff. I think it could still be there and still work. And I really love the idea of the clones being old.
I love that. That was such
it's the thing from the past that it represents a bygone era of just like wanton destruction. But at the same time, those are the only people qualified of actually protecting the galaxy. Kind of the idea is that maybe near the end, you remember in A New Hope, Leia says to Luke, "Aren't you a little short to be a stormtrooper?" So that kind of implies that they're is a height requirement, which I think could also
Mm.
imply that they clone again. So in the end, he makes maybe his first executive order as Darth Vader is, I want to commission 5 million new clone troopers, and that the first round of stormtroopers was clones. And then by the time we get to the sequels with Finn, the clones once again aged out, and they had to again
Mm.
take these drastic recruiting
A
measures.
draft.
Yeah.
Right.
Or even worse, just straight up kidnapping people.
Right. Well, yeah. Well, again, let me commend you on that because I love that. That's amazing. Um, and that kind of, I wrote down a few things, but I was definitely getting, I think we're evoking the feelings I get when I watch like Starship Troopers.
Ah,
That kind of like camaraderie between a squad, and we like these characters, but then when you take a step back, if you kind of zoom out, it's really something. It's rotten underneath.
yes. And I didn't even think about that too much while I was writing it. I kind of just let it flow. But Owen,
Mm-hmm.
especially, I like the idea of Owen being kind of like a
Yes,
Samwise Gamgee esque character.
I
Um,
love that.
and at some point, maybe in the second one, he is actually wounded, and
Mm.
Obi-Wan, being the squad leader, he lets him go. Basically, he
Mm.
Owen is discharged, honorably discharged, to go home to Tatooine. And maybe there's this big heartfelt moment of him like, I'm not going to leave you guys. I'm not going to leave. And they're like, Owen, it's okay. Like, you still have a part to play that
Mm.
you just don't know. But you're a good man. You deserve to go home and live a happy life. Which is all, that's the sort of stuff that's just like horrifically lacking in the prequels and then the sequels even.
I agree.
Like a heart.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And I think, well, because I wrote down Starship Troopers slash Star Fox,
oh,
because I think if we're talking about like Heart 2, you were mentioning there would be a montage scenes maybe of them on their campaign, essentially this military campaign.
mhm.
And we could get more, you could establish more camaraderie and fun and a heart from kind of like, I always like if anyone is unfamiliar, the video games Star Fox, where you get these, there's like a group of four characters, they all have very distinct personalities, and you get these cockpit conversations, and it's really fun. It's like you were kind of giving me a bit of that too when you were talking about especially establishing heart, or these relationships.
That's cool. I mean, these are just things that are missing. They did the
Hmm.
Mandalorian gets there a little bit with some of the stuff in the first and second season with like creating long-standing relationships or circling back to characters that you've already established. But that's the kind of
Mm.
stuff you need to see people go through stuff together and reveal things to each other about themselves.
Mhm.
Um, have conflict that then they come to either resolution or maybe they don't, and it damages the relationships between the people. You need to have humanity in these characters.
Mhm.
Um,
Absolutely.
but okay, so I said we weren't going to combine our pitches necessarily, but something I am
No.
interested in is hearing some casting choices because that's another point of contention with the original movies or the prequels. Is some of the casting is bad, is pretty
Mhm.
lacking. The biggest one being Anakin Hayden Christensen,
Mm.
who I don't think he is actually as bad of an actor as people think, but
No, I don't either.
he does do a bad job in those movies because unfortunately he is not the right type of actor to play kind of this stoic character, in my opinion.
Right.
So I would be down to start there. Do you have any casting choices or alternative casting choices for that character?
I totally I tried. I could not come up with legitimately anything. I have these people visualized in my head, and what's weird is, so no. The answer is no, I don't. And maybe
Okay.
if we come back for another time, then I can work on that. I mean, yeah, I couldn't think of any contemporary actors, and I know there are definitely people that I mean, yeah, you could absolutely do it. I'm just really not a casting focused person. But one person I was thinking that if my pitch wasn't necessarily Anakin Skywalker, like if it didn't have to be, essentially, if it didn't have to be a white guy, I really like the comedian Sam Richardson. Do you know him from like Detroiters? He's on Veep. Um,
I am not sure actually.
but he's just a really good actor, and for some reason I was just thinking about him because I really, yeah. That's it. I legit have nothing, and because I
Oh,
don't have any, I didn't write any like old characters because obviously I love like Michael Ironside, and I know you guys always talk about how it's the Michael Shannon podcast, and he just needs to be in these movies. He's like the best actor, period. But yeah, Michael
yeah,
Ironside, really anyone
cool,
from any. Because I also, when you were doing your pitch, I wrote down Scanners too. Yours
nice.
kind of reminded me a bit of Scanners with the way that, like, if you visualize the way that Anakin was seeing technology or things like that, or the way that the Anakin and Padme have a connection that's like kind
Yeah,
of physical, like
yeah.
psychophysical. I don't really know how to describe it, but so that
Something
made me think also of that.
that's awesome, and something that I didn't mention in the pitch, but I'm thinking about now is how it would be fun to show like a pretty big contrast between the ways in which these people experience the Force,
Mm-hmm.
where Anakin has this innate ability to be connected with technology, where it's just perfect. He doesn't understand. That's why he's always been a great pilot. If he gets trapped, he can escape. Like he can make doors open and stuff. He doesn't know why. He just has always been able to do this. Maybe Padme has this a similar thing, but with living beings, biological
Mm-hmm.
beings, with animals or people, where Anakin's kind of a
I love that.
manipulator and an escape artist.
Mm-hmm.
Padme
Mm-hmm.
is like a healer, a counselor.
Yeah, she's empathic. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, and
you're so
Anakin,
that's
because of his trauma of his childhood, it's more about like how can I survive? But because of her
exactly.
highborn status, yeah, there's more empathy involved. That's great.
I love that. Yeah.
Well, that's
Well,
cool.
why don't you do your casting? Because I have nothing.
For sure. Okay, well that that in mind, I'm just gonna go straight down my list then. So for Anakin, I have always thought Christian Bale, and I'm casting like
Mhm.
if they were cast in 1999 or whatever when they did this movie.
Oh, nice.
So
Okay,
I
love it.
not him now because he's too old, but then
And a psycho.
like
Mhm.
yeah, like American Psycho or shit, Batman Begins, like pre Batman Begins, Christian Bale, and
Mhm.
then even younger approach, Ryan Gosling.
Mhm.
There's a movie he was in, Nicholas Refn movie called Only God
Mhm.
Forgives, where there are a shitload of scenes of him just like meditating in a chair, in
Mhm.
like red, like harsh red light, and just kind of this droning music. And it always reminded me of like that's what I wanted Darth Vader's like dark side
Mm.
meditations to feel like it's this, a
Mhm.
force that he can't control. He is stuck in the darkness. And
Love
then
it.
an even even weirder one, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but Macaulay Culkin as Anakin Skywalker.
Mm.
And I mean that
Mhm.
legitimately in a true
Yeah.
dramatic turn. Macaulay Culkin in the late 90s. I think he looks like Mark Hamill a little bit.
Mhm.
So that's a broad array. And if I had to pick one, I would say Christian Bale. And
Love
then
it.
Padme, I kind of wanted to make Padme badass, given that she's like going to be a parallel Jedi figure. I thought Carrie Ann Moss, Trinity
Hmm.
from The Matrix, but
Oh,
also
awesome.
yeah, but at the same time, Natalie Portman is a fantastic actress and was given dog shit to work with in these prequels. So
Mhm.
I would be okay with her reprising the role. And again, this is like we're going back in time and remaking these,
Mhm.
not making them now. And
Mhm.
then some characters I kept the same. Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan, Qui
Definitely.
Gon Jinn, Liam Neeson. The voice
Mhm.
in Anakin's nightmares is Ian McDiarmid as Palpatine, but we just don't know who he is yet. That will be revealed later. Owen in the prequels was played by Joel Edgerton. He's only in like very brief moments, but he went on to be a pretty notable dramatic actor.
Yeah.
He was in like Warrior with Tom Hardy. He was his brother. More recently, he was in
Oh,
David
yeah.
Michaud's The King with Timothy Chalamet. That was he was Falstaff in that, and I don't know that to me it showed that dude has broad range.
Absolutely.
But because I compared the character to Samwise Gamgee, I cannot help but say that an alternate would be Sean Astin.
Definitely. Right.
And then the two big ones for me that would be completely recast are Mace Windu and Darth Maul. Darth Maul would be my
Mm.
recurring villain throughout all the movies. At some point, he learns that Sidious was planning to replace him with a new apprentice. He's been grooming Anakin his entire life. So Maul has his own agenda of I'm going to kill Anakin and then eventually kill Sidious, and I'll be the master. So Maul is like a rogue player throughout the three movies. And I looked up actors that were the same age as Ewan McGregor, and here's the three I found
Mm.
that I thought really worked. The first being Jared Leto. I
Mhm.
don't like Jared Leto. I've said that before on this podcast. He's a creepy
I hate
weirdo,
him.
but he's given some badass performances. Maybe not in the recent notable roles like the Joker. That shit was stupid. But in the past,
Mhm.
he's got some some powerhouse performances. But the other two who I like a little bit better are David Tennant, and then Paul Bettany, especially, who eventually ended up in Star Wars. He was Dryden Voss, the villain in Solo. He does a really good job, but it's just kind of not that good of a role. And that dude is, I don't know. I've always thought he was really good. I like him as the Vision in the Marvel universe. But so that's I think of those three, that's who I would say. Paul Bettany as Darth Maul from the beginning. Just a more classical kind of performance, Shakespearean. And then Mace Windu. I like Samuel L. Jackson. He is so wrong for the role. It's kind of hilarious. So I had Denzel Washington. I think at the time he was younger. Training Day had not happened yet, so there wasn't like this expectation of him being, like this fucking badass. It was more like he was Malcolm X and the guy from Glory. So he's this very capable young dramatic actor. Not young, but I don't know. I like the idea of him talking to Liam Neeson and saying like, oh, the Force is strong with this unit. Like, we need to check this out more so than Samuel L. Jackson. Like, I feel like him doing stoic is better. And then my backup was Lawrence Fishburne, purely based on The Matrix again.
Yep. It's a good one.
Yeah, but I think those are all fairly stereotypical casting choices, but that's what I got.
No, I think that's fantastic.
Right on. Well, I don't know that there's necessarily too much more to say. Did you have an alternate title or anything?
Oh, no, I didn't even think about it.
I kept mine as The Phantom Menace, but I'm realizing now that like there has to be a more clear-cut idea of what it is. Is it Darth Maul or is it the voice in Anakin's head? But I think that's cool if you leave the movie with that question. Where in the original movie, it's like, what does that mean? What are you talking about?
Yes.
So I'll say, yeah, Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. And I don't even. We usually sign off. We usually sign off by saying, "Please make this movie," but this is pure speculative writing exercise. A fun time for us.
Yeah.
Maybe they will one day remake the prequels. In which case, I guess I'll say, please make this movie, but I hope
I will say it too.
Yeah, okay. Please make this movie.
Kathleen Kennedy, please make this movie when we are both 75 years old.
All right.
And we can tell our grandkids that we tried.
Yeah, make it for our grandkids. Please make this movie.
Please make this movie.